Why do you think Malaysia is not paying extra attention to handling this whole Trump 2.0 thing and the relationship?
Out of these 5 names, who do you think in your mind would be most suitable based on the 3 criteria that I said just now?
My personal opinion, the ranking number 1 would be...
Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, the podcast that talks about politics and public policies in ways that are relevant to you today. We have an interesting lineup. The first part will be myself, Dr. Botak, and also
Peter, Mr. Money.
We'll talk and go into a deep dive on one particular topic, which I was also part of the conversation, which is the appointment of the new Malaysian ambassador to the US. We'll go into what an ambassador does and why is this particular role in the US, in Washington DC, especially important. And then the second part, we'll have a special guest, somebody who used to work in a high commission here in Malaysia. Her name is Maha Balakrishnan. She's an expert on parliamentary issues, and she'll be here to talk about the Parliamentary Services Act and also a couple of other important parliamentary reforms. So let's go straight into the first part. And I'll start off by asking Peter a sort of like intro question, which is, from your perspective, what do you think an ambassador to another country does?
Well, thanks to the other day's podcast together with Dato' Ilango, he gave us a good crash course, especially for myself, on ambassadorship, right? The general answer would be to be there by representing your country, right? To build that good relationship with that country that you're being sent to. Now, having said that as well, I will just interrupt a little bit with another question back to you.
Okay.
Since you're a little bit in a semi kind of like, I wouldn't say a brawl, but
some healthy
exchange
yes.
of opinion with Nazri, right?
Who Nazri Aziz, for context, was a former UMNO minister. He held different portfolios, and he was Malaysian ambassador to the United States from February 2023 to February 2025. That means he recently. I think his term expired on the 14th of February, which is today, the day that we're recording. Yeah, which is right. Also Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day to all those who are celebrating. Yes.
So was it on purpose that this interview with Dato' Ilango happened and then you went into an exchange of opinion?
Okay, so I'll be very frank with you here, and I hope this also is heard by Dato' Nazri. I've been thinking about the position of the Malaysian ambassador to the US for a few months now. Not thinking about it because I want to take that position, although he speculated that that's why I wanted, and I'll come back to that later. But I've been thinking about it since early November 2024. And the reason why I was thinking about that position was because of Trump 2.0. I knew that once President Trump was elected for the second time, there is going to be a lot of policy uncertainty, a lot of different sort of like announcements that will basically flood the zone, right? And we need to have an ambassador in DC that can really pick up on these different trends and do different things with it, right? So this is where the strategic nature of the ambassador comes into play. That person, that ambassador, has got to be able to distill that information and send that information not just back to Wisma Putra or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but on some relevant points directly to Prime Minister Anwar, so that Prime Minister Anwar knows that these are important points that he needs to keep in mind, whether it's discussing with other cabinet ministers, other civil servants, or even other world leaders.
Yeah.
And this person, this ambassador, also needs to be able to convey certain messages to individual ministers in the cabinet. So, for example, there's news that maybe Southeast Asia is going to be hit with certain tariffs. That person must be able to contact the MITI minister straight away and say, this is going to happen, you better take note and all that. Of course, there is a MITI official in the DC embassy that also gets access to this kind of information, and he or she will also send an email to report back to the senior management of MITI and also the minister and deputy minister. But having the ambassador be able to contact the minister of not just MITI, Minister of Defence, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Finance, the important portfolios, you need to have that kind of person who's able to do that. The third sort of like responsibility is that you need an ambassador in DC who can engage with the various stakeholders. And this is not just with President Trump, his cabinet, but also with other members who are in Capitol Hill, meaning the senators, the members of the House of Representatives that sit on important committees, whether it's the Foreign Relations Committee, the Defense Committee, the Appropriations Committee. You need to be able to circulate in that ecosystem, and also in the DC talk shop circuit with the different think tanks that are there, with the different, even some of the corporate players that have FDI, interest in Malaysia, some of the lobby groups, that are important to Malaysia. That's the kind of ecosystem that we need an ambassador to circulate in.
So I guess what you're trying to say is that we need a ambassador in the US that is much more proactive in terms of keeping your ears to the ground and then responding promptly and quickly for our own national interest sake. Right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I definitely do understand why we want to pay attention to Trump 2.0. I mean, it's all over the news, right? Every country is on the toes to prepare for Trump 2.0.
Yes.
Right? And it's almost like a national priority for many people, spoken or unspoken.
Yes.
My question to you following that is, do you think Malaysia has made this our number one agenda or something that's really very much in priority? Does it look like it? And in terms of, based on your years on the ground, do you think that we are preparing for it?
My short answer would be no. I don't think we prepared for this contingency, especially not in a very comprehensive way. So why do I say that? If let's say Malaysia was thinking that, there's a possibility that Trump could win. And, for a long time, it was a 50-50 fight. Of course, he was in the lead when Biden was still the candidate. The lead narrowed when Kamala Harris became the candidate. So if let's say we had foreseen this possibility, I think Malaysia may not have been so keen, would have, I think, positioned ourselves better in terms of whether or not we're going to join BRICS. Right? And this is the position that Vietnam took. They expressed interest in joining BRICS, and then once Trump won the elections, and once the BRICS secretariat was asking whether the countries who expressed interest initially wanted to put in an application, Vietnam pulled out. Right? This doesn't mean that we shouldn't join BRICS, but the way we position ourselves, I think, would be different. Right? This is also got to do with the role of this prime minister. The other thing that I think we didn't really prepare ourselves is also linked to the press statement that I made with regards to the fact that Prime Minister Anwar was not able to arrange for a phone call with President Trump when he was president-elect. Right? So a lot of people, including some past ambassadors and high commissioners, Malaysian, said that I should not have made such a big deal about this phone call, right? I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. This isn't the main responsibility of the ambassador, but it is an important one. And let me explain to the viewers why this is important. All of the other major Southeast Asian countries managed to arrange for their head of government to have a call with President Trump when he was president-elect. That means before January 20th.
Yep.
Of course, the most famous one was President Prabowo.
Yeah, the Indonesia call, right? Yeah.
Yes. That one he,
and he is the BRICS country some more.
Yes. And then the first country in Southeast Asia to officially, join BRICS. That was one. It was reported that the Thai Prime Minister also had a call. The Philippine President had a call. The Singaporean Prime Minister had a call. I think the Vietnam Prime Minister also had a call. So you can see the major countries in Southeast Asia all had calls with President-elect Trump. Why was it that Malaysia was left out? And Malaysia also happens to be the incoming chair of ASEAN at the time. right? So it's not just Malaysia, but the importance that we take when we are the incoming chair of ASEAN, right?
Yeah.
So
kind of like representing ASEAN as well,
Exactly.
not just Malaysia, right?
Exactly, right? So when this call wasn't arranged, I think that it showed that we dropped the ball. I think the ambassador has to take some responsibility, but also maybe others in the ecosystem, including those in the Prime Minister office, drop the ball. And this is another reason why I answered the question that you asked just now by saying that we were not that well prepared, right? And just to let you know, usually these calls, right, with a president-elect, it is arranged through the embassy. Not arranged through the State Department in the US or through the presidential office. Because at that time, President Trump was president-elect.
Yep.
Right? So you cannot call the White House to say, hey, I want to talk to President Trump, because the president in the White House at the time was still Joe Biden.
That's right.
You cannot ask the US State Department, or you cannot ask the ambassador here in Malaysia, the US ambassador here to Malaysia, to say, oh, can you ask the State Department, your colleagues in DC, to arrange for this call between Prime Minister Anwar and President-elect Trump, because they only serve the sitting president. And at that time, the sitting president was Joe Biden.
Yep.
They served the sitting Secretary of State at that time, Anthony Blinken. Right? So they couldn't even arrange for a call with Marco Rubio, because he hadn't been confirmed as the State Secretary yet, right? The Foreign Secretary of the United States, right? So, this is why it's really important for us to have somebody in DC as the ambassador who can engage with all these stakeholders and to be able to have a direct line with many of them, so that we can have this kind of engagement and interaction at the right level. Right. And I'll say a little bit more about this, and then I'll also draw it back to the Malaysian ecosystem, which again many viewers may not be aware of. It's not just the ambassador that has to play his role in terms of his or her role in terms of engaging at the high level. You also need to mobilize and strategize with your team at the embassy, right? Because let's say you can have an engagement with a senator or a member of the House of Representatives, but to get to that level, you need your diplomatic corps, whether it's an officer from MITI who's dealing with economic matters, or your officers from Wisma Putra, your first, your second secretary, to engage with the staff, the head of staff, or one of the policy workers, one of the assistants to these cabinet ministers, senators, members of the House of Representatives, so that you can arrange for those high-level meetings with the ambassador. So you really need to mobilize and lead a team.
Right. But I guess in order for that to happen, you kind of need an ambassador that is really on ground and someone who kind of have that operating experience to a certain extent, right? So in this case here, it's quite interesting because I read the article they wrote, your press statement, and one of the things about it was Dato' Nazri being there during at the time. What do you think that the role that he was really playing there, or was he able to do those things that you talk about? Because as far as I'm concerned, he was definitely not from the foreign ministry itself, right?
Yes.
So unlike Dr. Ilango, Dato' Ilango is someone who actually grew into that position.
And he's familiar.
Yeah, and he's someone who was airdropped in that way, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So what do you think was his role there? And what did you kind of observe that made you decide to write a press statement about it? I mean, you could have written the whole thing without including him in your statement, right?
Yeah. So again, to be fully transparent, right? And this is why I wanted to go into a deep dive for this particular issue. My main purpose of writing my press statement was to give prominence to the importance of that position, Malaysian ambassador to the United States based in Washington, D.C. at this point in time under Trump 2.0. It's not to say that, other ambassadorial positions in other countries, including some very important countries like Singapore, Indonesia, the UK, Japan, China. I'm not saying that those positions are not important. I'm saying that this particular position at this point in time is extra important. Extra important.
The current time and setting, right?
Exactly. And this is why Dato' Nazri became a little bit of like a collateral damage.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not trying to target him specifically. It's just that he
happened to be that time at that place.
and he opened the door for this kind of discussion because of a few factors. One is the fact that he held up this Make America Great MAGA sign at a Trump convention. And that photo was displayed on his wife's Instagram account. His wife, you can go and check, on Instagram or Google. His wife is actually very active on social media. She has, I think, over 150,000 followers on Instagram because I think she's quite fashionable. She does a lot of interesting things. Even before she became, the wife of the ambassador, Malaysian ambassador to the United States. So that opened up the door for me to comment because that was also reported in one of the online portals.
Yep.
And people said, oh, he should be punished, he should be recalled for holding that sign. I think that he shouldn't have held up that sign because, you can attend that event without necessarily supporting the message of that leader.
Yeah.
Right. And I think for him, it was like, I know a little bit about Nazri and the way he acts. He's like, oh, this looks quite fun. I don't really care what others say. I'm just going to hold it and make a picture out of it. Right. So that makes it, gave an opportunity for me to not just look at it from that picture point of view, but also to explain to people the importance of the phone call that wasn't arranged. And also the importance of social media engagement, right? I mean, it's kind of weird that at this day and age, right, you have an ambassador, to an important country like the US, where social media engagement is something that people look at, because, when your staff at the embassy goes to engage with the staff of senators, of cabinet members, and all that, right? They want to know who is your minister. What is he doing here? What is his profile? Right, so if you don't have any social media profile, you're not active on Twitter, you're not on Instagram, then people don't know what you're doing there. People don't know what you stand for. People don't know what you like to do. So I'll give you an example. Again, I will explain later why I'm not qualified to be in this position. But if I was in that position, you know what I'll do on my Instagram account? I will post myself going to Cameron Indoor Stadium to watch Duke basketball games. And maybe get a handshake with a coach or something because I went to school there. I did my PhD there, and Duke basketball is a very, very big thing in the US because it's an important school. People know about the basketball program, and then I can associate myself with that program. I can mention that I was a Fulbright scholar. Went to the United States to study in a good school sponsored by the Fulbright program, which is something that many Americans, including those in the government, would know about, right? And then and what I would do is I would also have some speaking engagements with some of the think tanks there, whether it's CSIS or in Johns Hopkins, so that I can position Malaysia and ASEAN in the context of ASEAN in a way that is politically relevant to the United States. I'll talk about things like how we are a critical component in the semiconductor supply chain. How the US companies have invested this much over this number of years in Malaysia and ASEAN, and how we are good partners to the United States from an FDI standpoint, right? So all this I will put on LinkedIn, I'll put on Instagram, I'll put everywhere on social media, and whoever in the US, in the United States government that wants to check on what am I trying to project in terms of Malaysia image, they know. Right? I don't need to go and repeat. Ask my staff to tell my staff this is what you should emphasize. They can do their own checking. But if you don't have any social media presence, who are you? You are just a normal Malaysian ambassador to the US.
So maybe he purposely hold up the MAGA sign to put on the wife there to balance things out, right? I'm supporting America.
I don't think Nazri is that strategic.
But I guess based on what you have said, and I can understand the points of it, in general, the whole idea is that as an ambassador, while I would say that you shouldn't be showing too much of biasness to a certain country. You want to maintain a certain neutrality, but kind of display that open relationship and that support to build relationship, right? Not particularly as a follower, but as someone who's relevant to gain mutual benefit from.
Okay, so
right?
I'll give you some examples. some examples, maybe some positive and some not so positive. The outgoing Brazilian ambassador to Malaysia, a friend of mine, Ari Quintela, he was in Malaysia for about 5 years. And he, I think, is a stellar example of what an ambassador can achieve. If you think about Brazil, right, Malaysia doesn't feature very high in their sort of like mind share. And for Malaysia, Brazil doesn't feature very much in their mind, in our mind share as well. But Ari was able to draw different points of commonality. He published a book highlighting the life of a very famous Brazilian artist and sculptor who actually designed the KLCC Park, right? And he, published a book and got different people to, endorse it, to talk about it. He regularly had different engagements with politicians from all sides, and also some members of the royalty, and of course, cabinet members. And he will post it on Instagram in a way that highlighted certain areas of commonality, right? And this kind of engagement, right, is something that really can highlight the importance of the role of the ambassador. Yeah. And because of his activity and also his constant reporting back to Brasilia in Brazil, he was able to secure very good appointments when, for example, the Deputy Minister of MITI, Liu Chintong, went to Brazil to engage with different people in the ecosystem. And importantly, he was able to secure an invitation from President Lula in Brazil for Prime Minister Anwar as part and parcel of Brazil's hosting of the G20. Right? Because G20, Malaysia is usually not invited. Right? But because I think Prime Minister Anwar has some kind of kinship or relationship with Lula, both of them shared maybe a little bit of a similar background in terms of how they were persecuted. So Prime Minister Anwar got the invitation and he got a meeting with Lula. And this was also a way for us to highlight, for example, the fact that Petronas has been investing a lot in the oil and gas sector in Brazil. Yep. The fact that companies like Yinsen, who's in the FSPO sector in terms of service provision to the oil and gas sector in Brazil, is also a very active member.
I think we have Glove there also, right?
Yes, we have Glove. And also an important point where we were able to represent the viewpoints of the glove sector because Brazil had imposed higher than necessary tariffs. So I think the tariffs were reduced as a result of this lobbying.
I understand that today as we'll look at this at time, there were quite a number of things that we have put in there, especially in terms of like why do you put your criteria there as in direct access to Anwar, to cabinet, stakeholder agreement, stuff like that. But before we move into that, right, just one particular question to kind of wrap it up before we go into those things is, why do you think Malaysia is not paying extra attention to handling this whole Trump 2.0 thing and the relationship? But instead, what am I seeing is the approach currently, a lot of different units in Malaysia, from Penang government to everyone who kind of have a trade partnership in US, they are very eager to quickly go and make statements now. This is what I noticed, including our MITI minister also is showing that we're open for business with America. We have a good relationship, but there don't seem to be any centralized strategy to say, hey, as a government, this is what we're going to go. Why?
Okay, let me draw you behind the curtain. So a lot of these foreign engagements or diplomatic engagements, right, a lot of heavy lifting is done by the foreign minister and, more importantly, the head of government, and in this case is Prime Minister Anwar.
Yep.
On the part of the foreign minister, Mahasan, who was the former Negeri Sembilan Menteri Besar, I'm not sure whether you've noticed, he's not taken a very prominent role in terms of trying to represent Malaysia in terms of our leadership of ASEAN, trying to find a way forward with regards to the South China Sea or Myanmar. He said some statements, but not really taking that much of a leadership role, partly because I think he sees, and others also see, that Prime Minister Anwar wants to be at the forefront of our foreign policy because he's the head of government. He's somebody that is well known throughout the world because of his past. What has happened, over the past 2+ years, right, is Prime Minister Anwar has had good engagements with heads of government and also, senior leadership people in different countries all around the world. But he has been somewhat snubbed by the United States. Why do I say this? Anwar has gone to the US 2 times. Once was to address the UN General Assembly. The second time was to California as part and parcel of the US hosting of APEC in San Francisco. This was, if I'm not mistaken, in 2023. Right. So, both times, he did not have a meeting with any senior US official. He did not have a formal meeting, a one-on-one meeting with Joe Biden. When he was in New York, he did not have any meetings with even people from the US State Department. Somebody like Anthony Blinken, for example. Right. And it's partly because Prime Minister Anwar made certain statements and made certain overtures to, let's say, the Hamas leadership in the context of the Middle East conflict, in ways that made it very difficult for President Biden and also the senior leadership within the State Department and even cabinet ministers to engage and meet up with him. Right. So this is, I think, something that could be a miscalculation on the part of Anwar. Meaning, yes, you can have your firm views in regards to what's happening in Gaza, but once you go overboard, so to speak, in some areas, right, then you would have to expect a certain reaction coming in from the leaders in the United States. Right. So that's one. Second thing, I think, in terms of this kind of approach towards the US, I think Prime Minister Anwar has focused a bit too much on the validation that he gets from the US companies that are investing here. Meaning, he probably sees, hey, no problem, what? Even though I don't get meetings with high-level people in the US in terms of their government, Google, Microsoft, AWS, some of the semiconductor companies, they are still very, very keen to invest in Malaysia. And I get to meet with all these big shot corporate CEOs when they come to Malaysia. Right? So I think he thinks that that's okay. I can get these engagements when I go to the US as well. I managed to get a close call. I managed to get a call with Elon Musk. Right? To allow his business to operate more freely in Malaysia, whether it's Starlink or Tesla. Right. So I think that maybe gives Prime Minister Anwar a false impression that he can do business with the US anytime. It may not be the case now, because a lot of these tech players, a lot of these big corporates, they're also looking at what Trump is saying and doing, and they're also being careful, right?
Even Google Map, if I'm not wrong, on the area of Gulf of Mexico, you see a bracket.
In brackets. Gulf of America.
Gulf of America. It was immediately written. They just written a new history there.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that is something that can be quite dangerous, because ultimately inter-country policies will affect the rest of the other things. I guess, like, for example, just by them limiting a certain level of chips coming into Malaysia, that could also change the way or the quantum of investment in data center in Malaysia, which I'm not sure whether the team anticipated for that. And on the other hand, also, I was just wondering to myself that, because in the past, Prime Minister Anwar was someone that was, a lot of people would say that he's more close to Americans, especially back then when he was working in Mahathir, right? Tun Mahathir.
And even after that, when he was released from jail for the first time, he was a visiting fellow at Johns Hopkins in DC and also at Georgetown. And during that time, he did, circulate quite widely among the political establishment in the United States.
That's right. And I felt like that could have been something that would have been used to his advantage to build a stronger relationship with America right now in this Trump 2.0 situation. But I think there were a lot of, I'm not sure whether is it miscalculation or is it strategically, intentionally not doing it. But I guess as a Prime Minister, you also have a lot of things, right? So it also comes down to your whole foreign ministry team to design those policies and direction. Yeah. So I guess that's the reality right now.
So I think it's not too late to pivot, and that is why I wrote my media statement recommending a few names to replace Nazri, since his term is coming has already ended, as Malaysian ambassador to the US. And this appointment is important because it will signal what Anwar wants to do with regards to the US-Malaysia relationship.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So I will read out those names, and then I want you to respond and maybe see which one you think would be, which of these candidates you think are more suitable than others, lah. Right. So I'll state the names out. One of the first names I propose is the current MITI Minister, Tengku Zafrul, right? Because his senatorship is going to end later this year. Another name that I propose, Nurul Izzah, right? Former MP and also daughter of Prime Minister Anwar. Another name that I propose is, Yusmadi Yusof, who was a former senator as well as former MP for Balik Pulau. Not so well known internationally, but is somebody who's a close confidant of Anwar Ibrahim since the Reformasi days. And then less well known would be Prof. Faiz, who is the current chairman of the Institute of Strategic and International Studies. He has followed Prime Minister Anwar on many international trips, including writing some of his foreign speeches for him. And then the last one, more for his corporate contacts and his savviness in terms of engaging with, the Western community, so to speak. Nazir Razak, the former chairman and CEO of CIMB, right? So out of these 5 names, let me put it to you. Who do you think, in your mind, would be most suitable based on the 3 criteria that I said just now? Access to the Prime Minister, access to cabinet ministers, and also ability to engage with the different stakeholders in the US.
My personal opinion, the ranking number 1 would be Nazir Razak.
Oh, okay. Why?
Yeah, because for a number of reasons, definitely all of them have access to all these things, but I think he is definitely someone who's very well respected in all areas, from business to politics side, all the way until other countries,
even international.
business, internationally, yes. Right? Yeah, he's actually quite well known. Yeah, and he has the influence and power.
Correct.
Yeah, it's kind of like people know him. That's all. End of story, right? And Trump is someone who is pretty much a deal maker. And he is very used to making deals, Nazir Razak. So I think he has the experience to actually handle the very weird relationship and the kind of style that Trump likes to throw, which is he'll threaten you and then pull back, stuff like that. And I think someone like Nazir Razak is familiar with these kind of tactics, right? So he will be able to handle it just so well. Yeah, and it also signals some sort of importance for Malaysia, where he's someone that's very high profile in Malaysia in that sense, where at the moment you send there, it also signals that, hey, I'm sending someone that's very well respected in Malaysia to your country.
A heavy hitter.
Yeah, a heavy hitter, right? Number 2, I would say that it will be Nurul Izzah. Okay. However, I think that it's unlikely due to all the political chapters that were born out of this. But nonetheless, it also shows this for someone like President Trump, if he is noticing this whole thing, which I think he does, right? Sending your daughter there signals that you care a lot about the relationship. Yeah. However, my concern is her experience, because definitely this particular role in this kind of time, you need someone who really is on the ground before and really knows the people who... You want to start building relationship right now, maybe a little bit too slow to respond to things. Yeah, so she need a very strong team to support. So I would say these 2% are people that I think,
Okay, so let me respond to your comments. I agree with you about Nazir Razak's ability, especially his international exposure and corporate experience, which is one of the reasons why I put his name there. Of course, the one area where there would be a gap is the lack of direct access to the Prime Minister, because he's not somebody whom is close to the Prime Minister for different reasons. We don't know what those could be, but definitely he doesn't have the kind of access that some of the others that I've named have. But that access to the Prime Minister can be built, can be created, can be nurtured, because you look at somebody like Zafrul did not have any access to Prime Minister Anwar before 2022. Yep. And in fact, Anwar was campaigning against him in Kuala Selangor.
That's true.
Right? So, but, I think Anwar saw the value that Zafrul brought to the table once he was named as a MITI minister, and he continued to rely on Zafrul on a lot of things. And I think if, let's say, the same kind of mandate can be given to Nazir Razak, he would also be able to communicate not just with the Prime Minister, but he has respect among the various cabinet members as well, especially in some of the important positions, right? Whether it's Minister of Finance, Minister of MITI, he's somebody who knows the UMNO ecosystem quite well as well. But yeah, so I think that gap is something that needs to be addressed by him and also by Anwar if he is to be named into that position. My personal preference is for Izzah to take up that position. Because I've known Izzah when she was an MP. I follow her career closely. Some of you may not know, she actually did her master's in Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay.
She studied her master's at the Johns Hopkins a SAIS school. So she knows that ecosystem from her engagements there as a student, and also she has the charisma and the kind of story that can allow her to gain access in ways that other ambassadors would not. Why? Because her introduction to whoever is the stakeholder that she's engaging with is, number one, I'm the Prime Minister's daughter. Number two, my mother was the former Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Right. And number three, I myself has been was a member of Parliament for 4 terms or 5 terms. I can't remember the exact number. Right. So I have that kind of political chops. Right. So that kind of introduction is not easy to be replicated by anyone else.
That's right.
And because of her charismatic nature, I think she would be definitely a hit among the sort of like think tank, talk shop ecosystem, because she can articulate herself publicly.
That's true.
And she also can engage privately among the different members of the diplomatic community and also other stakeholders in the ecosystem. You are right in the sense that I think Anwar would find it hard to, initially maybe defend against allegations of nepotism and things like that. But I think if he is bold enough to make that appointment, and because extraordinary circumstances under Trump 2.0 calls for extraordinary action, including extraordinary appointments.
This guy swing the balance straight away, Yeah, it's kind of like whatever they did, now you just swing the balance because you went to I sent my daughter here.
Correct. and maybe, again, this is not something that I've communicated to Izzah or any of her close friends. I think it will also be good for her to try to establish her own identity as a Malaysian diplomat and ambassador outside the country. Because here, she will always be caught up in a lot of things that she has to do for her father, for Prime Minister Anwar. Out there, she's much more her own person. She will have the opportunity to exercise leadership over the embassy as well.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. And to be able to come out on her own to display her own leadership capabilities.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that naturally you already have a strong team there, right? Because Malaysia has been there for quite a long time, have so much trade partnership. So I think that
I'm not sure whether we have that strong of a team there. But I feel more confident than if let's say Izzah was the ambassador, she will be able to convince Wisma Putra to beef up the staffing there, to get MITI to send a good person who's there. I don't know who the current representatives there are now, so I'm not trying to downgrade your role, but I think under Nazri, maybe their role wasn't given so much prominence or wasn't coordinated as well. Right? Which brings me to the last part that I need to respond to, because Nazri did say, hey, if you want to lobby for the position, just come out to say it lah. Don't need to get and whack him or criticize him, right?
I'm pretty sure you're not going to get a position.
So I mean, I tweeted this out lah. I said, look, I think I could probably do a better job than Nazri because the bar is a bit low. I would be able to engage with the people in DC and the larger ecosystem, both formally and informally. I think based on my own strengths and knowledge, right? But I think the reason why I wanted to clarify this is because the access to the Prime Minister is a very important component, right? And I think this is where I don't think I can establish that kind of rapport with the Prime Minister in a way that Izzah has definitely, in a way that Nazir Razak can. So if let's say you find that rapport is not there and it's hard to establish, the first criteria are already failed, right? So I take myself out of the running already,
Right.
And you know me, I gave up my own MP seat for somebody else, right? So if I really wanted that position and I think I'm qualified, the best person for it, I will admit it. But I think all the names that I propose are better than me from the perspective of access to Prime Minister.
Also, I know that if you really were a lobby for this, you wouldn't write that article.
Yeah.
You would have done it differently.
Yes, correct. Yes, yeah, and yeah. So I think you know me well enough to know the kind of things that I do for different purposes, right? So yeah, I hope that this explains to you guys the importance of that particular position and why I think you should continue to pay attention to whoever is going to be appointed as Malaysian ambassador to the United States. Be right back with Maha Balakrishnan after this. Welcome back to the second segment of the Are We OK podcast. And Peter has been replaced by Maha Balakrishnan, who is a parliamentary and institutional development specialist and a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group Malaysia, Integrity, Governance and Anti-Corruption focus. So Maha, welcome to the Are We OK show.
Thank you for having me.
You want to introduce yourself beyond
Sure.
what I just said about you?
I think you've basically covered it. So I do a lot of work on parliamentary strengthening and also capacity building for MPs, their officers, but also for civil society groups that want to incorporate parliamentary advocacy into their larger policy advocacy strategy.
So just for some context, we first met, if I remember correctly, when you were an officer working on similar issues at the UK High Commissioner, at the UK High Commission to Malaysia.
Well, yeah, I think we had a lot of engagements when I was in the British High Commission. I was the political advisor there for about 4 years. But I think we met before that, actually. So I was in legal practice for about 12 years before I moved into this area. And in that time, I don't know if you recall, Kian Ming, but you gave evidence during the RCI,
Yes.
the Project M RCI.
Yeah, this was, I think, in Sabah, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Over some of the IC issues.
Absolutely.
And this was when I was tracking, some of the electoral roll issues under the Malaysian Electoral Roll Analysis Project, or MERAP. Yeah. Oh yes, I remember that. Some time ago, but
quite some time back. Yeah.
So we're here to talk about institutional reform in the parliamentary context, and we want to focus specifically on the Parliamentary Services Act, because this act is going to be tabled in Parliament for the first reading in this session, the first parliamentary session of 2025. So, Maha, maybe for the benefit of the audience, could you? Firstly, let me take a step back. Do you actually monitor what happens in Parliament on a regular basis in terms of some of the speeches, some of the Q&A, some of the headline items that comes out from Parliament?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally, I do.
Yep. And how would you evaluate the quality of discussion and debate in the current Parliament?
I'll take a longer term view.
Okay, yes.
And I think definitely over the course of the last 8 years, going back even further from 2008 onwards, you can track, I think empirically, how things have changed. For the better, largely for the better, in terms of the quality of certain things like parliamentary questions, in terms of the opportunities available for MPs to get information, to put forward problems and get a response in a more timely fashion than what they used to. You can even track the level of debates on issues. But I think the most important development that we've seen, which has been a net positive, is the committee system.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So right now, and I think since 2018, we have finally got around to having a parliamentary committee system.
A more robust in terms of composition and also the number of parliamentary special select committees.
Yes, not just the number of special select committees, but also empowering them, giving them better mandates and powers.
And resources?
And
maybe not that much. Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Yeah.
But I think also in terms of the capacitating, is that even a word? Capacitating MPs, enabling
yes.
them to be able to do the job the way it's supposed to be done.
Okay.
So I think we've seen, especially in the last 2 years, a spike, not only in the number of reports that have come out, but the quality of the reports as well.
Yep. So, I myself have gone through, 9 years in Parliament. And definitely could see some improvements. For example, having a second chamber where you could ask questions in a more timely fashion, having ministerial question time, and then now Prime Minister question time, where more timely issues can be brought up to the table. Having more reports on the part of the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, for example, and now having an opposition member lead the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, where a lot of reports are tabled and they have the right to call different people up to be questioned, including ministers, senior civil servants and the like. So in this context, since things are already moving on quite well, why do you think we need a Parliamentary Services Act?
Because all the positive things we spoke about have an underlying negative component to it.
Okay.
And this goes back to how our parliament operates. And despite all the progress that we've made, the Malaysian parliament still operates within a circle of executive dominance.
Okay, executive dominance meaning that
in terms
the
of
government has overbearing control.
Yes, from different aspects, and they come at it from different aspects. So from how Parliament is administered, the control that government has over that, the fact that the vast majority of the staff that work in Parliament are public servants. Who pays their bills?
The government.
The government pays their bills. Who decides their career pathways? The government decides their career pathways. They move in and out of Parliament, the civil service, ministries, etc., and so on. That's just not appropriate. And then from a different aspect, who controls parliamentary time and parliamentary business? Still the government of the day. So there are various modes of control around this. And that means that in every single progress that we've seen, there are limits. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
We just talked about parliamentary committees. We can all agree it's a general rule. That's fantastic. But they are still not permanent committees. The next government that comes in has no obligation at all to put those committees in place.
Yes, they can abolish all those committees.
It will automatically be abolished, and that's because these committees haven't been given any permanent status. We talked about the PSA. Excellent, the fact that we have an opposition MP heading it. Is that in the rules yet? No. That's still something that's done by parliamentary convention. So to make it something permanent, the standing orders needs to be amended, and the government isn't ready to do that for some reason.
Yeah, so I probably can point out to other examples as well. The Secretary of the Parliament is a civil servant.
Yes.
And I've seen how, for example, that person, who's in charge of parliamentary proceedings, can really, influence the Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, the lower house, in order to, prioritize certain bills or prioritize certain actions, and others will get demoted, right? So, you've seen that happen. And then if, let's say, you have a parliamentary secretary that maybe is a little bit too, independent, that person may be removed and replaced by somebody else, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then also I think, of course, the focus is very much on the Dewan Rakyat, which is where all the elected MPs are sitting. The role of the Speaker in being able to control a lot of things that happens in Parliament, talking about standing orders and amending them. All this is also under the control of the Speaker, who is appointed by the majority parties that are in government, and also I think heavily influenced by who the Prime Minister wants to be in that position. Correct?
Yes.
Yep.
I think that's accurate
Yes.
summary.
Yeah, and then we've seen how, for example, I have written about this before in some statements, how the former Election Commission chairman, Art Harun, Tan Sri now, was then suddenly catapulted to be the position of the speaker after the Sheraton move in 2020. And, even though I think he tried to exert his own independence, it was quite clear that on important decisions, he would listen to the executive, specifically Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin at that time, right?
Yeah.
So how is this PSA going to, give more independence to Parliament?
Okay, so I was talking about that circle of dominance, right? So what this PSA will do is it will break that circle, at least one part of it. It's not the solution for all the problems that Parliament faces, but it's a first step. So the idea really is to put in a new act, because we need it to be legal, to put in a new act that introduces particular elements that are important for independence. Number one, to say very clearly that Parliament controls its administration. Parliament controls its financial affairs. And number two, to set up a parliamentary service, which means a new workforce, a new system or scheme for a workforce specifically for Parliament, so that we can stop taking officers and staff from the civil service and create our own. And then number three, to ensure that the independent, the new management body that needs to be set up within Parliament is actually answerable to Parliament. Now, it needs to be independent, but it also needs to be answerable to Parliament. And I think that component is important, because otherwise what we'll just end up with is just another body that is managing Parliament, but has no real links in terms of accountability back to Parliament. So I think the final point, and I think this is also critical, and I'll explain why in a minute. It may seem a little bit obvious, but the services and the departments that are standard within Parliament, that are part of the establishment, we actually need to spell them out in an act.
Okay, we need to name them.
We need to
list
name
them
them
down so that these things cannot be easily changed or removed.
That they cannot be easily changed and removed, but equally important, so that you can ensure that they do get resources,
funding and things like that.
And so on. Because as you know, when it comes to the budget, to have your particular budget lines, etc., you need to be able to have an enabling provision or legislation that you can tie it to. If you don't, it's that much harder to get funding for it. That's one of the problems that's facing the committees in Parliament.
I can attest to that, because you have limited secretarial capabilities, which means the kind of quality of engagements and meetings, and even the quality of note-taking and report preparation is also affected by the scarcity of resources. But let me, for the sake of the audience, because both of us know the workings, inner workings of Parliament relatively well. But for the audience, they may not be so familiar. What they see maybe is some highlights, from the parliamentary sessions where MPs are shouting at one another, which I have to let you know that's the minority. It's not the majority. Most of the time, it's a little bit more boring. But from their perspective, can you explain perhaps, who will actually run Parliament? Who will be the CEO of the Parliament, right? In terms of the executive of the Parliament, and what kind of accountability structures are you thinking of that would be good for the PSA Act?
Yeah, so let me take a step back first. So here's what we know. We know that the government wants to put in a Parliamentary Services Act. We are hoping that the bill will come in next week. We don't know what that bill contains. So I can give you a laundry list, a wish list of how I think it should be structured, but I can't say that this is what the government's going to do.
Sure, and you've already outlined some of the important criteria.
Yeah. So in terms of management, ideally what we'd want to see is almost like a two-tiered structure.
Okay.
And really, I think any of your listeners who are working in an organization will recognize these elements.
Okay.
Number one, you need a management body. That management body should be given the control of the day-to-day running, the operations, maybe some of the larger priority settings even, management of the staff, the workforce, and so on. But certain elements of what that body does needs to be verified. And so you need a second body.
Yeah.
And
so some sort of like a management team and then after that, some sort of an oversight board.
Yes, an oversight board, precisely. Our suggestion is that it should actually be composed entirely of parliamentarians, the oversight board. One of the core functions of that oversight board would be to review and approve the budget that is proposed by the management body. Another role for the oversight board would be to also approve or play a role in making high-level appointments, like the secretaries of each house, to have a say in that system, like the chief administrator, because you will also need a chief administrator for Parliament aside from the secretaries. Another role would be oversight, actual oversight. So to, for example, evaluate the annual report that comes out of the management board. That's one layer of accountability. The second layer must always be Parliament as a whole entity. So the two houses of Parliament should still retain some authority over the management body, in the sense of perhaps issuing resolutions for the appointment of the individuals who sit in, let's say, the oversight committee, and also perhaps some of the positions within the management board itself.
Okay, so maybe just spend a little bit more time on this. You talk about the two houses. How would the management part of Parliament engage and report to and interact with, let's say, the Speaker of both houses? Because right now, both speakers have some sort of influence over, the administrative aspects of Parliament. How would that change under a PSA that you guys propose?
So we're not entirely reinventing the wheel, or rather we're not entirely setting something new up here, because we used to have a Parliamentary Services Act up until 1992. So we can borrow some of what was done then. So the management board, in order to ensure that both houses are represented equally, both the president of the Dewan Negara and the speaker of the Dewan Rakyat would of course head the management board. You would have also on the management board the secretaries of both houses, because they are in charge of the management of parliamentary business in each house. They are in charge of that. You would have who is now called the Chief Administrator of Parliament. The Chief Administrator basically just pulls together all the other administrative stuff within
the
Parliament.
Different operational aspects.
The operational aspects.
Security, landscaping, parking.
So they are essential on the management board.
Library services,
And finally, you should have an equivalent number of MPs and senators from each house, just a small number, appointed by resolution of the individual houses. We've also suggested that it's probably important to have one or two eminent persons, so people from outside of government, outside of Parliament, to sit in the board almost like a non-executive.
Okay, so like it could be former judges.
Yes.
Former
absolutely.
Professors.
Yes.
Or former senior MPs or politicians, right? Who can lend their voice to make sure that Parliament has that kind of stature that it deserves. Okay. Let me ask you another sort of like in the weeds question, which I think maybe wasn't covered in the two of the podcasts that you've appeared on. You want Parliament to be able to have financial independence, right? And you also want some level of accountability, which you can get from the board oversight. But how about requisitioning the finances from the Ministry of Finance, from the government of the day? How do you ensure that Parliament is properly resourced so that they don't have to continuously go begging to the executive to approve hiring of more people, more resources in different areas?
So Parliament would have to have their own controlling officer, pegawai pengawal, right? All of these things would need to be in place so that Parliament has full control. But we are also suggesting that where finances are concerned, we're probably not ready to move towards full independence or autonomy. So what probably will work in the short term is a collaborative relationship between both Parliament as well as MOF for the moment. So this is perhaps the stickiest point, actually, this relationship, but simply because so much of the control is currently in the hands of the MOF. And unpacking that is going to take a lot of work that cannot be done immediately so that it can be finalized in this PSA.
Sure. Okay. Understand.
Yeah.
Yep. So it will, for the budget items or the financing, it would be probably stated that the money will be, obtained from the government, and in terms of the details, it will be left silent for the moment.
Yes.
Right? But in terms of all the other details that you talked about, the structure of the management, committee or board, and then the structure of the board of oversight, including some of the proposed members, those things will be spelled out.
Yes.
Right. And
hopefully, yes.
No, I mean that you are making this recommendation.
Yes.
Hopefully, the government does incorporate or has already incorporated this, because I know you've engaged with the government and in fact different governments at different points in time. Correct. Maybe you want to say a little bit more about that, because I think you've been very consistent. You've engaged with, for example, the Barisan Nasional government before 2018. You engaged with the PH government after 2018, and to the extent possible during COVID, I think you also engaged with the Perikatan National government under the two prime ministers, Muhyiddin and also Ismail Sabri, and then now under the Madani government, right? So, how have you found those engagements and interactions to be?
We have, I think, made the most progress over the last few years. But I think here's what we've noticed. Actually, almost across the board, within the political parties, there is actually consensus that this needs to be done. I think a lot of people still see the repeal of the Act in 1992 as a mistake. I think the political class, if you will, is fairly in agreement that something needs to be done. The sticking points that we've seen across different administrations remain the same.
Okay, the details.
The details. One is the finances, like we've just talked about. And the second issue is actually around what happens to the public servants who are now working for Parliament.
Sure.
How do we sort that out?
So, for the benefit of the listeners and also viewers, under this new Parliamentary Services Act, I think your proposal, the NGOs that have also engaged with the government, is to have a separate Parliamentary Services Commission or Parliamentary Services staff that will not be taken from the civil service and easily inter-exchange, right? So
Yes.
This would be their own scheme.
Yes.
This would be a closed service in the sense that you should be able to recruit directly from different sources. You can take from the civil service if they want to apply to join.
Yes, but they would have to leave the civil service in order to move to the parliamentary service.
And maybe for the benefit of the viewers, can you explain why some civil servants who are currently in Parliament would find this to be not so attractive?
Sure. 3 reasons that people keep mentioning. I think 2 are easily resolved, 1 not so. Number 1 is salary, number 2 is pensions, and number 3 is career. Okay, so with number 1 and number 2, salary scheme being equivalent to what they're getting under the civil service, pension entitlements being equivalent to what they get under the civil service, these are concerns. But these are concerns that are actually fairly easily resolved, because you can say either in the Act or even back into the Constitution that they should be entitled to similar, same or better entitlements and benefits that they were getting under the public service. In fact, this was already there previously, as I said, and removed. So it's almost a simple solution of putting it back in. The difficult one is actually career progression, because as you pointed out, Kian Ming, it's a closed service and it's a fairly small service. So one thing that they will lose, any current staff of Parliament who is a public servant, if they move into the parliamentary service, if they accept it, what they will lose is the opportunities, the career opportunities that you would find in the public service that are far more limited within a closed parliamentary service. Having said that, the idea is that all current staff would be given the opportunity to choose and assured of a role and a job should they want to go back to the public service.
Yeah, I think on the third part, the point that you raised just now, if we have a Parliamentary Services Act that establishes a different different parliamentary service, this would put us in line and consistent with many parliaments in developed countries, right? Where it is a separate service and people actually feel proud that they are working in the parliament of the country.
So, and I think this is probably a really crucial point. It isn't so much, I believe, for us to explain why we should have one. It's actually on the government to explain why we don't have one. So there was a survey by the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, came out about, I think, 2020. So they surveyed 176 countries. 146 countries had independent parliamentary services. 146.
Yes.
And out of that, I think 90% of the 146 countries had their own parliamentary service, not civil servants. So really, we are the exception.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, once you properly resource Parliament, you can have interesting career opportunities. For example, you want to perhaps beef up some of the research capabilities.
Yeah.
You want to beef up even some of the internal sort of IT capabilities, advocacy capabilities, external engagement capabilities.
You see, one of the difficulties that we see, not just with Parliament, but also with other industries that use the public service, but are, let's say, statutory bodies, is that there is a limit in terms of the qualifications that you can ask for, the certain skills requirements that you need for your industry or for your sector are not necessarily available within the public service. They have different requirements and different rules and standards. So I think by having its own service, Parliament will also then be able to be more specific about the kinds of skills that they require for each role. For example, the officers that need to staff a PAC, the Public Accounts Committee, very different from the officers that need to staff the Human Rights and Institutional Reforms Committee.
In terms of
expertise needed, right? But right now they're essentially drawing from the same pool. Right, and relying on and relying on expertise from outside of Parliament.
Yeah.
So these are the things really that having its own parliamentary service can change.
Sure. So, for example, for PAC, you need somebody who I think would be somewhat familiar with accounting, with finances,
auditing and accounting. Yes, absolutely.
Which is probably a skill set that you may not need in parliamentary special committee for like you say human rights or institutional reform.
Yeah.
Right. So this is where I think that kind of staffing is important, and I think given your proposal in terms of how the management committee is going to be comprised of, the MPs themselves, and speakers, either directly through the management role or indirectly through the oversight, can make these kinds of recommendations.
Absolutely.
Because they know what are the kind of expertise, skill set, training that is needed within that context.
Yes,
right?
exactly right.
And right now, because MPs, are not empowered, are not given that kind of responsibility, they just say, this is not my problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if PAC doesn't have enough resources, what they will do is they will ask the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister to give more resources.
Yes, or they go to the Auditor General
and
suck on staff, which is not optimal.
Ideal. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think there's a very good point to raise. In terms of the long-term capacity enhancement.
Yes.
Right. And maybe I'd like to ask you, prod you a bit in terms of, on the same lines, capacity. Do you think that with an enhanced parliamentary capacity, will it also allow the MPs themselves to do a better job? Whether it's in terms of parliamentary discussion or coming out with good reports?
Absolutely. I'm confident it will make a difference.
Okay.
Because, and I can refer to the work that I do with committees, the work that I do with MPs. It's very clear that a lot of the obstacles that they face, the challenges they face, are a question of resource and a question of time and a question of just lack of control to be able to determine these issues. Like to say, these are the resources I need and to get it. So they need to be part of the conversation. And I think right now, MPs who are doing a lot of good work are not part of the conversation in terms of the sorts of resources that Parliament needs and how those resources need to be distributed.
Yeah. viewpoint on whether or not Parliamentary Accounts Committee proceedings, meetings, and also some of the special Parliamentary Select Committee meetings, should they be broadcast live or should they be accessible to others, maybe journalists, maybe interested members of the public? What is your view on that?
So there is a really obscure rule in the standing orders which has been interpreted to mean that these committees shouldn't have public hearings. It's obscure. I don't agree with the interpretation. My view is that the committee should be given the right to decide if an inquiry should be public or not. I don't think it should be imposed on them because there are some really strong reasons to have closed hearings.
Yeah, for some of the sensitive topics.
For some of the sensitive topics, and we hear this across the board from committee members and chairs over the last few years. There are certain situations in which a member of a ministry, a senior officer, wants the mic turned off in order to share pertinent information with the committee. And I think we need to be able to facilitate that. Second reason is MPs are showboaters,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, I can attest to that. Yes.
So a lot of good work is actually achieved
away from the public eye.
Away from the public eye in committees. MPs really work together from across the board. They do try and find real solutions. But as soon as you introduce the cameras, that will change. So I think you need to give the chairs of committees and the committee members themselves the ability to make that decision on their own, whether or not to have a public inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank with you, I'm 50-50 on this because having been in different committees, but not on the PAC, but somebody who obviously reads a lot of the PAC reports, I can see how some civil servants, some senior people would not be so open in their sharing if, let's say, they knew that this was for the television, even though whatever they say in the PAC report, for example, is actually published in the PAC report, but having that kind of visual representation and coupled with possible showboating, like you say, which is very highly likely to happen, it may not be so purposeful, and may not help the parliamentary committees achieve their purpose if you have this kind of live broadcasting, for example. Are you having any concerns in terms of how much the government is willing to do to have to put in those kinds of recommendations that you've put on the table? Is that why you've not just come here but also appeared on a couple of other podcasts as well?
Yeah, so there are a number of think tanks and civil society groups that have been working on this issue for a while. Who are following it closely and are hoping for the best. But we do have concerns about what might be introduced or what might be left out of the bill. So I think that's really we're hoping that the government will actually share their bill fairly soon. But more importantly, give an opportunity to MPs themselves to study it closely and to take more time. Yes, this bill needs to happen yesterday, but it shouldn't be rushed and then in turn sacrifice quality. Yeah.
So one possible solution could be the government tables the bill for the first reading.
Yes.
And then after the table is available for after the bill has been tabled, it's available for public consumption. Perhaps refer it to a Parliamentary Select Committee, and the one that's relevant here would be the one on institutional reform, chaired by William Leong, the MP for Selayang, and use that platform to call in the different stakeholders for them to give their inputs, and then for the Parliamentary Select Committee then to make recommendations for how this bill can be improved, and then pass it on to the government to update. Would that be something that is...
That would be ideal.
Okay.
It hasn't happened yet. And that level of engagement with MPs actually hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And this is their bill. This is the bill that's going to impact them directly.
Yeah.
So it's very important that they spend time on it.
Yeah. So actually one bill that I am familiar with that went through that process after some MPs expressed their unhappiness was the generational endgame bill. I'm not sure whether you remember.
Yes, I do.
I think the Minister of Health at that time, Kari Jamaluddin, did a number of engagements, including with the then opposition MPs, of course with the government MPs as well, and very strong views were shared. And he referred the bill to the Parliamentary Select Committee for Health and Science, and they discussed, debated, they put in the recommendations. Of course, then Parliament was dissolved and elections were held. So in the end, whatever we have, for the Generation Endgame bill, it was, I think, changed quite a bit. It was decoupled in some ways. Some people were not happy with it, some people were okay with it. But I think what we're both, advocating for is to have a process where inputs can be given and also taken into consideration.
Yeah. I think you talked about the weeds just now, right? And going into details on this bill. And actually, this bill will make or break on the details. And particularly when we talk about things like civil service, right? I think one of the main concerns is can we put in a bill like this without changing that component? So parliamentary staff continues to be drawn from the civil service. So my answer is no, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. I think that's one of the key components. But if that is the sticky point, then I would suggest two solutions. The first one is to have a transition period. So stagger the implementation of the bill, but put it in, introduce the parliamentary service, perhaps stagger it so you have more time to work out the details. The second solution, and it's not an alternative, I think this needs to go in any event. You were also talking about real life examples, Kian Ming, of situations in which you can see senior members of the Secretariat being able to influence politics, influence the direction of politics. And at the same time, we also know of situations where MPs, ministers, because of the power dynamics, because of the fact that they're public servants, have the ability to put undue pressure on staff. So in order to respond to this, one of the key things that we need in this bill, and I hope the government will not have any objections to, we need to have statements like provisions in the bill which clearly say Parliament is independent, staff must act independently or impartially, and a code of conduct, code of ethics. All of this, we can find them in similar acts from other countries.
Other countries, yeah. Okay, and I think, that having the opportunity to view and discuss the bill and hopefully not have a situation where the bill is tabled for the first reading and then, second and third reading also happens during this parliamentary sitting and then suddenly it's rushed through and pushed through. I think that would be sort of like the worst outcomes, especially if, let's say, the bill is not one that is as comprehensive as what you would like it to be.
Yeah, it would be history repeating itself.
Sure. Okay, maybe just a few other things. I saw, in your Sina Harian interview that one of the things that you highlighted was the fact that probably the opposition MPs would also want some spelling out of equal constituency allocation, in this Parliamentary Services Act, because that's not something that they are getting now. Do you think this should be spelled out in the Act, or do you think it should be a separate piece of legislation?
It should ideally be a separate piece of legislation, but we haven't even got to the point of whether it's something that should be given in the first place. That's a separate question. But if it's the choice between putting it in legislation or continuing to have it dispersed directly and under the sole domain of the Prime Minister, then certainly it should be through an Act.
Okay. Again, my viewpoints on this is that I agree with you. It should be a separate act itself to highlight the importance of this issue as a important commitment on the part of this government in terms of institutional reform, right? But right now, I don't really see that happening. Maybe again, I ask you to speculate on this a little bit. Do you think there's a more than 50% chance that this government would pass some sort of equal parliamentary constituency allocation act before the next general election as a way to protect themselves in case they find themselves to be in the opposition?
I think a lot will depend on how they see the assessment that they make on their fortune.
Okay. So the electoral prospects.
I think the electoral prospects, definitely, because I think it's way too early. I think only if they see themselves at real risk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then finally, another sort of like parliamentary issue that perhaps shouldn't go into this bill. I think definitely shouldn't go into this bill, but maybe should come in another bill that's separate from even the constituency allocation, would be the issue of political financing for political parties, right? This is something that you've also worked on in the past. What do you think is the sort of like a temperature check or the willingness of this government, as you see it, to introduce some sort of a political financing act to, give public funding for political parties?
Issue with political financing is actually the responsibility isn't solely, or the pushback isn't solely from the government. It's actually coming from all parties. Because not so much on the concept of political financing or political funding, but on the actual aspects, the different aspects of it.
The process, for example, if let's say you're going to donate to a party, you need to declare it.
Yeah,
and things
so
like
you
that.
have the issue. So when you break down political financing, right, what are you talking about? First up, are you talking about public funding for political parties, right?
That's one aspect, yes.
Yeah, so where money comes from the public coffers and a small portion is channeled to every political party or candidate, depending on the vote share, etc. That's number one. Do you agree with that or not? And then number two, disclosure obligations, right? So do you require donors to disclose their identity? Do you require parties to disclose the identity of their donors?
And what is the threshold?
What is the threshold for that? Is that information made public? Some countries actually put it up on their website, name, details, etc. Right? Do we go to that extent? Who controls the information? Right? How do you handle the risk of selective persecution? Then you have limitations. Do you agree on limitations? So the other end of it, limitations on donations. And some parties actually don't agree that there should be limitations. And then you have the issue of limitations on donors. Should GLICs be exempted, excluded completely or not? Then you look at the issue of who should be the regulatory body? A body that already exists? Do we create a new body?
Should it be the Election Commission?
Absolutely. Or MECC, who should it be? And then the final issue is, should political financing, an act to regulate political financing, cover party elections? So the pushback, there is pushback from every party. So I'm also part of the APPG on political financing. So there's been a lot of engagement with different political parties, and there is pushback from every party, but on different elements. That's
so I think if I had to make a bet or a guess, the chances of an equal constituency allocation bill would probably be higher than a political financing bill, right?
By this much.
By this much, all right. So we'll wait and see. This government has about 2 years to go, 2+ years before the next general election has to be called. One indication of the seriousness in terms of parliamentary reform would be the details of the Parliamentary Services Act, which we will have access to a copy relatively soon. So in the meantime, thanks so much, Maha, for all your insights, and I'm sure this will be good reference material for all those who care about these issues, scholars, lawyers, students, and all the best and good luck to you in your continued advocacy for parliamentary and institutional reform.
Thank you, Kian Ming.
All right. See you guys next week.